Welcome to today's explainer on westward expansion and manifest destiny. I'm super excited to dive into this crucial period in U.S. history with you. We're going to unpack the huge causes and effects of a 19th century geographic shift that literally transformed the entire North American continent as we know it.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the ideology of expansion, then compare settlers' claims versus the actual evidence. After that, we'll look at the Mexican perspective, follow it up with the indigenous perspective, and wrap it all up with the consequences and a final recap.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the ideology of expansion. If you look at this timeline, it perfectly maps out our cause and effect story today. You can see how one major event cascaded right into the next over just a few decades. It kicks off with a massive Louisiana Purchase in 1803, rolls right through the Indian Removal Act and Texas independence in the 1830s, and leads straight to the Mexican-American War breaking out in 1846. So where does all this massive momentum actually start? Well, in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase practically doubled the size of the country overnight. And you've probably heard of Lewis and Clark, right? Their famous expedition absolutely captured the imagination of the American public. It sparked this powerful ideology and mindset totally dedicated to expanding American influence, wealth, and power. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about exploring the unknown just for the fun of it. It was a massive, intense drive for economic exploitation and raw opportunity. Moving on to part two, settlers' claims versus evidence. Now, this part is super interesting. We really have to separate what people said they were doing from what actually happened. On one side, you've got the settlers' claims. Many genuinely believed they were on this destined, almost righteous mission to spread civilization and religion all the way across the continent. But when we look at the actual historical evidence, the reality is starkly different. The hard facts point to violent land seizures, a massive loss of life, and the forced displacement of established indigenous and Mexican populations. And why this matters to us is that it reminds us how grand ideological claims can easily mask a much, much harsher reality on the ground.
Let's shift gears to part three, the Mexican perspective.
So, how did this ideology affect Mexico? Well, the situation in Texas quickly turned into a major conflict. American settlers living in the Mexican territory of Texas started using violence against the Mexican government to get what they wanted. And looking closely at the historical record, this whole movement was orchestrated largely by slaveholders. You see, their primary goal wasn't just grabbing some extra farmland. They wanted to build an American empire that specifically included the institution of slavery. And this violent push eventually culminated in 1836 when they formed the independent Lone Star Republic. Let's do a quick pause here to check our understanding. Why didn't Texas immediately join the U.S. in 1836? Think about it. If the ultimate goal of these American settlers was to be part of the United States, why didn't the U.S. just go ahead and annex Texas the very second it declared independence? Well, the immediate reason all comes down to domestic politics. The memory of the Missouri crisis was still incredibly fresh for everyone. So the U.S. government actually refused that initial request for annexation because they were terrified of disrupting the super delicate political balance in Congress between free states and slave states. Adding Texas as a massive brand new slave state was just seen as way too politically explosive at the time. But as you might guess, that hesitation didn't last forever. By the 1840s, under President James K. Polk, that drive for expansion surged right back up. This led directly to the United States engaging in the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. The final outcome? The Mexican Cession. This was a massive transfer of land that added nearly half of Mexico's entire territory to the U.S. We're talking present-day California, New Mexico, and the establishment of the southern border right at the Rio Grande.
That brings us to part four, the indigenous perspective. During the Age of Jackson, popular culture really leaned into harmful biases, essentially viewing Native peoples through this completely fabricated lens of savagery. And this wasn't just some casual cultural attitude. It was purposefully used to justify incredibly harsh domestic policies. All that popular animosity was eventually turned into law with the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This act explicitly mandated the forced removal of Native populations. It specifically targeted what were called the 5 civilized tribes living in the southeastern United States, all to clear out their ancestral lands for white settlement.
Time for another quick pause check. So, did the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in favor of the Cherokee in Georgia actually stop their removal? when the highest court in the whole country stepped in and ruled that the Cherokee Nation was, in fact, entitled to their land? Did that legally protect them from being forced out? The tragic, immediate answer is no. That ruling ultimately offered zero real-world protection. Even though the Cherokee won a massive legal victory, the executive branch basically just ignored the court's decision, and the U.S. military was sent in to carry out the forced removal anyway. It's a vivid, honestly shocking demonstration of how that intense drive for land completely overpowered even the highest legal protections of the time.
And we have to remember, the Southeast was far from the only region affected by this. After the War of 1812, the defeat of the Western Confederacy and their famous leader Tecumseh led to a massive loss of contested lands up in the Northwest. Even before that, there was a string of broken promises from the British about protecting native territories after the American Revolution. Fast forward a bit and you have the California Gold Rush. While it was a tremendous economic boom for American settlers, for Native Americans on the West Coast, it brought catastrophic violence, devastating diseases, and a staggering loss of life. Finally, Part 5. Consequences and final recap.
Let's bring all of this together and look at our key takeaways from this explainer. First up, the ideology. This intense, relentless drive for economic growth and land is what truly fueled the Westward movement. Second, the reality. We clearly saw how settlers' claims of a destined, righteous mission totally masked the harsh historical evidence of violent conquest. Third, the consequences for Mexico. They lost nearly half of their entire national territory following the Mexican-American War. And lastly, the consequences for indigenous peoples. They endured forced removals, broken treaties, and an absolutely devastating loss of life. When you look at the big picture, the ideological cause of expansion resulted in profound, devastating effects that permanently altered the geography and the demographics of the North American continent forever.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. How does understanding the difference between historical claims and historical evidence change how we view modern conflicts over land and resources? The big takeaway here is that you can apply this exact same critical lens to the world around you right now. When you hear grand claims being made today, always pause and ask yourself, okay, but where's the evidence? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you next time.